On our wedding day, my husband disappeared right before the ceremony. Hours later, I found a note from my own sister. He's mine now. I was left humiliated and heartbroken. Years later, I received a letter, not from her but from him. I made a terrible mistake. It read, "Please meet me one last time, before it's too late." The letter trembled in my hands as I read the final line again. "Please meet me one last time, before it's too late." 5 years after he abandoned me at the altar, Eric wanted to see me. But my mind wasn't on his desperate plea. It was catapulting back to that day, the day everything shattered. Before we continue this tale of betrayal and resilience, I want to thank you for joining Emma on her heartbreaking journey. If you're drawn to stories of people overcoming devastating betrayals and finding strength they never knew they had, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps support more content about women reclaiming their power after unimaginable loss. Now let's return to that fateful wedding day that changed everything. I woke that morning to sunshine streaming through lace curtains, my wedding dress hanging on my childhood bedroom door like a promise. My mother knocked softly, entering with a breakfast tray I was too excited to touch. Her eyes gleamed with tears as she set it down. "Hi, beautiful Emma," she whispered, smoothing my hair. "I can't believe my little girl is marrying her high school sweetheart today." The Turner household buzzed with activity. Florists delivering arrangements of white peonies and blue hydrangeas, my bridesmaids arriving with mimosas and makeup kits, my father pacing nervously in his tuxedo. Everything was perfect, just as I'd planned since Eric proposed under the old oak tree at Miller's Pond. "Has anyone heard from Veronica?" I asked, realizing my sister, my maid of honor, hadn't arrived yet. "She texted that she was picking up something special for you," my cousin Melissa said, helping fasten the pearl buttons down my back. "Said she'd meet us at the church." I didn't think much of it then. Veronica had always been the spontaneous one, the sister who craved more than our small town of Millfield could offer. While I found purpose teaching third graders, she chased bigger dreams, always talking about New York and Paris. But she promised she'd be there for me today, and despite our differences, I trusted her. My mother's hands trembled as she secured my grandmother's pearl-studded veil. "Perfect," she breathed, stepping back. The room fell silent as everyone took in the final result. "Eric won't know what hit him," my best friend Jenna said, wiping away a tear. Mrs. Sullivan, Eric's mother, arrived as we were preparing to leave. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "You've always been the daughter I never had. I'm so happy you're making it official today." The bridal party departed for the church in white-ribboned cars, leaving me alone with my father. He looked at me with such pride it made my throat tight. "Ready to become Mrs. Patterson?" he asked, offering his arm. "I've been ready since 10th grade, I laughed, taking one last glance at my childhood bedroom. The church looked like something from a fairy tale. Pews adorned with blue satin bows, candles flickering in hurricane lamps, sunlight streaming through stained glass. 200 guests filled the sanctuary, practically everyone in Millfield. I waited in the small antechamber, listening to the string quartet play Pachelbel's canon, my heart racing with anticipation. Then came the first sign something was wrong. Pastor Wilson appeared, his brow furrowed. "Emma, the ceremony was scheduled to begin 10 minutes ago, but Eric hasn't arrived yet." "He's probably just running late," I said, though Eric was never late for anything. "Maybe there was traffic from his parents' house." Jenna pulled out her phone. "I'll call his best man." The minutes stretched painfully. My father loosened his tie, checking his watch repeatedly. Mrs. Sullivan appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. "I can't reach Mark," Jenna whispered, referring to Eric's best man. "He's not answering." Pastor Wilson cleared his throat. "The guests are getting restless. Should we make an announcement?" "No," I said firmly. "Eric will be here. He has to be." Another 20 minutes passed in increasingly frantic phone calls. My stomach knotted as I heard whispers from the hallway. "Try calling Veronica again," I urged Melissa. "Maybe she knows something." Melissa's expression changed as she dialed. Her phone's going straight to voicemail. "And Emma, she never showed up with whatever she was picking up for you." A horrible thought began forming, too terrible to acknowledge. I shook my head to dispel it. Mrs. Sullivan burst into the room, her face ashen. "I just called our house. The housekeeper says Eric came home after the rehearsal dinner, packed a bag and left early this morning. He didn't say where he was going. The room started spinning. This couldn't be happening. Not to us. Not after 8 years together. I need to sit down, I whispered. That's when Pastor Wilson entered with an envelope. Emma, this was just delivered to the church office for you. I recognized the handwriting immediately, Veronica's looping script. With trembling fingers I tore it open and unfolded the note. Asterisk, he's mine now. Don't try to find us. 5 words that demolished my world. I read them again, unable to process their meaning. The note slipped from my fingers as a strangled sound escaped my throat. My father caught me as my knees buckled. Emma? What is it? I couldn't speak. Mrs. Sullivan picked up the note, her face crumpling as she read it. No, she gasped. He wouldn't. But he had. My fiancé and my sister. The betrayal so complete it felt like physical pain. What followed remains a blur of humiliation. My father standing before our friends and neighbors, his voice breaking as he announced there would be no wedding today. The collective gasp that echoed through the sanctuary. Mrs. Sullivan collapsing into her husband's arms. The pitying glances, the hushed whispers as guests filed out. Poor Emma. Can you believe Veronica would do such a thing? Always knew that girl was trouble. How will Emma face anyone after this? I sat immobile in my wedding dress, unable to cry, unable to speak as my mother methodically removed the veil and the pins from my hair. It wasn't until later that evening, after I'd changed into sweatpants and sat numb in my childhood bedroom, that the full extent of their betrayal became clear. Eric's father discovered their joint bank account had been emptied the previous day. My mother found Veronica's closet cleared out, not hastily packed but methodically emptied, suggesting weeks of planning. The final blow came when Mrs. Sullivan called, her voice hollow with shock. Emma, we found receipts in Eric's trash. 2 one-way tickets to New York, purchased 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. While I'd been writing my vows and choosing flower arrangements, they'd been planning to devastate me. While Eric kissed me goodnight after our rehearsal dinner, promising to see me at the altar, he knew he was lying. I finally broke then, sobs tearing through me until I could barely breathe. My mother held me like she did when I was a child, helpless to ease this adult pain. How could they? I kept asking. How could they do this to me? There was no answer that night, nor in the days that followed. Only the certainty that the 2 people I had trusted most had conspired to break my heart in the most public, humiliating way possible. Little did I know then that their betrayal was only the beginning of a story far more twisted than I could have imagined. The first day back at Pinewood Elementary tested every ounce of strength I possessed. 6 weeks after what people now called the Patterson-Turner incident, I stood outside my classroom door, gripping my lesson planner until my knuckles turned white. Principal Davis had offered me extended leave. Take all the time you need, Emma. But staying home with my thoughts was worse than facing the whispers. I smoothed my navy dress, took a deep breath and stepped inside. 23 third graders looked up with innocent curiosity, blissfully unaware that their teacher had become the centerpiece of Millfield's most scandalous gossip. Children were my salvation in those early days, their uncomplicated needs and genuine affection forming a protective barrier against the adult world's cruelty. Good morning, Miss Turner, they chorused, and for those precious hours, I could pretend my life hadn't imploded. The teacher's lounge was another matter entirely. Conversations halted mid-sentence when I entered. Sympathetic smiles barely concealed morbid fascination. Diane Winters, who taught 4th grade, attempted normalcy by asking about my summer curriculum plans, but her eyes kept darting to my bare ring finger. I heard they were planning it for months. I overheard the new music teacher whisper in the copy room. Her own sister. Can you imagine? I became an expert at appearing not to notice, at holding my head high while walking through the grocery store as conversations hushed, at smiling politely when well-meaning strangers offered unsolicited advice. You're better off without him, honey. Some men just can't be trusted. She did you a favor. Imagine if you'd married him and discovered the truth later. Home offered little respite. My mother's monthly updates about Veronica were delivered with painful regularity, despite my protests that I didn't want to know. Veronica posted photos from the Hamptons. She mentioned one Sunday dinner, 6 months after the non-wedding. They look happy. I pushed my pot roast around the plate. Mom, please. I know it hurts, Emma, but she's still my daughter. I can't just pretend she doesn't exist. My father's hand covered mine. Your mother's caught in the middle, sweetheart. I understood their impossible position, loving two daughters who could never again be in the same room. But it didn't make it easier to hear about Veronica's glamorous New York life with the man who was supposed to be my husband. They've rented an apartment in Manhattan, my mother continued, unable to help herself. Eric's found work at some investment firm. Veronica says. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I need to grade papers. It was Martha Sullivan who became my unexpected lifeline. Eric's mother appeared on my doorstep one rainy April evening, clutching a casserole dish, her eyes red-rimmed. I keep making too much food, she said simply. Old habits. We sat in my small living room, two abandoned women united by the same betrayal. Martha had aged a decade in a few months, the proud matriarch of Millfield's most respected family now diminished by her son's actions. Robert barely speaks anymore, she confided, referring to her husband. Just sits in his study staring at old photos. He won't even say Eric's name. Our Tuesday evening dinners became a ritual neither of us acknowledged but both desperately needed. We never discussed them at first, the unspoken rule. Instead we talked about her garden, my students, books we'd read, safe topics that allowed us to momentarily forget what connected us. Until the night she brought the photo album. I found this while cleaning, Martha said, her voice catching. Our family trip to Lake George. You were there. The summer after junior year. I'd gone with the Sullivans on their annual vacation. The photos showed teenagers in swimsuits laughing on a dock, Eric with his arm around me, Veronica sulking in the background. She always wanted what you had, Martha whispered, her finger tracing my sister's image. We should have seen it. Dating seemed impossible in Millfield, but loneliness drove me to try. Jason Crawford, who managed the local bank, took me to dinner 14 months after my wedding. That wasn't. He was kind, attractive, and completely wrong. I've always had a crush on you, he admitted over dessert. Even in high school. What he didn't say, what hovered unspoken between us, was that I was now attainable, no longer Eric Patterson's girl. The evening ended with an awkward kiss and my promise to call him. I never did. Then came Daniel, a history teacher from the neighboring district who hadn't grown up in Millfield and didn't know my story. Our relationship lasted 3 months before he heard it from a colleague. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded. Because I wanted to be Emma, not poor Emma for once, I replied. He left, unable to handle the baggage I carried, or more truthfully, the town's fascination with it. After him came Michael, then Peter. Each attempt ending in the same uncomfortable realization that I wasn't just dating them. I was dating my history, my humiliation, the collective memory of my most painful moment. You should move away, Jenna suggested during one of her visits from Chicago. Start fresh somewhere no one knows you. But leaving felt like admitting defeat, like letting them win. Millfield was my home. I'd teach its children, tend my garden, and eventually the whispers would fade. I constructed a life of careful routine. Monday staff meetings, Tuesday dinners with Martha, Wednesday book club at the library, Thursday volunteering at the animal shelter, weekend grading and lesson planning. I planted tomatoes in summer, carved pumpkins in fall, built snowmen with neighborhood kids in winter, and planted flowers in spring. My days became predictable, controllable. Yet beneath this carefully orchestrated existence festered a bitterness I couldn't quite contain. It emerged in unexpected moments. When a student announced her mother was having a baby, and I realized I'd lost not just Eric but the future we'd planned. When wedding invitations arrived and I made excuses not to attend. When I drove past the house we'd planned to buy on Maple Street, now occupied by the Johnsons and their 3 children. You need to forgive them, Pastor Wilson suggested during one of his well-meaning visits. Not for their sake but for yours. But forgiveness felt impossible when the wounds remained so fresh. When my sister's occasional phone calls to our parents never included an apology, when Eric had simply vanished from my life without a backward glance. So I lived among the whispers, wearing my dignity like armor, finding purpose in my third grader's achievements and comfort in Martha's understanding. I convinced myself this half-life was enough, that the safety of my routines compensated for the emptiness inside. Until the day the letter arrived from Dannemora prison, and the carefully constructed fortress I'd built around myself began to crumble. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday in April. Unremarkable except for the stamped return address. Dannemora Correctional Facility. The mail carrier handed it to me with the same casual indifference as the electric bill and supermarket flyers, unaware he was delivering an earthquake in paper form. I recognized Eric's handwriting immediately. The slightly slanted letters, the way he crossed his T's with a flourish. For a moment I couldn't breathe. 5 years of carefully constructed normalcy threatened to collapse with this unexpected intrusion from the past. I placed it on the kitchen table, unopened, and went about my evening routine, grading spelling tests, watering the African violet Martha had given me, making a simple dinner I barely tasted. The envelope sat there like an unexploded device, demanding attention I refused to give. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed in bed, imagining countless scenarios. Was it an apology? Request for money? Some final twist of the knife? By morning the envelope remained unopened, my curiosity at war with self-preservation. "You got a letter from who?" Jenna exclaimed when I called her during my lunch break, seeking guidance. "I haven't opened it yet," I admitted, huddled in the corner of the teacher's lounge. "Throw it away," she said firmly. "Nothing good can come from reopening that wound." Perhaps she was right. Yet I couldn't bring myself to dispose of it. For 2 more days the envelope accompanied me, from table to counter to bedside table, its presence a constant reminder of the past I couldn't quite escape. On the 3rd evening, after a glass of wine and Martha's cancelled dinner plans, I finally slid my finger under the flap. "Dear Emma, I never expected to write this letter, and you have every right to throw it away unread. But circumstances have forced my hand. I've been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe less. I know I don't deserve your time or forgiveness. What Veronica and I did was unforgivable. But before I die, I need to see you one last time. I made a terrible mistake. Please meet me one last time, before it's too late. There are things you need to know. Truths I should have told you years ago. The visiting hours are listed on the back of this page if you decide to come. I understand if you don't. Eric." I read it twice, then a 3rd time, my emotions cycling between shock, anger, and a vindictive satisfaction I immediately felt ashamed of. Prison. Both sentences he never expected when he drove away from Millfield with my sister. I flipped the page, finding the printed visiting schedule and another handwritten note. "I'm at Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora. Inmate #A7842-19. Convicted of securities fraud and wire fraud. 5-year sentence. 2 years served." The internet filled in the blanks. A search for Eric Patterson securities fraud yielded a Wall Street Journal article from 3 years ago. Rising star broker sentenced in $4.2 million investment scheme. There was a mugshot I barely recognized, Eric's confident smile replaced by hollow eyes and gaunt cheeks. According to the article, he'd created an elaborate Ponzi scheme targeting wealthy investors, promising extraordinary returns that initially materialized through new investors' money before the inevitable collapse. No mention of Veronica. Just Eric, described as a calculating predator who betrayed the trust of clients who believed in him. The school librarian found me hunched over the computer after hours, tears streaming down my face. "Emma, are you all right?" I closed the browser quickly. "Just reading a sad story." That night I sat on my porch swing, letter in hand, completely adrift. Part of me, the still wounded part, felt a dark satisfaction. The man who had humiliated me was suffering, imprisoned, dying. Wasn't that the justice I'd secretly craved during those endless nights after the non-wedding? Yet another voice whispered that this changed nothing. Whatever truths Eric wanted to share couldn't undo the devastation he and Veronica had caused. Why reopen healed wounds? Why give him the closure he sought when he denied me mine? I did what I always did when truly conflicted. I called Martha. "He's dying," I said when she answered, my voice cracking. A sharp intake of breath. "Who's dying, Emma?" "Eric." The name felt foreign on my tongue after years of avoiding it. "He wrote me from prison. Pancreatic cancer." Silence stretched between us, heavy with shared pain. "Have you told Robert?" finally asked. "Not yet." Her voice sounded distant. "What does he want from you?" "To see me. He says there are things I need to know." Martha sighed, the sound of a woman who had exhausted her capacity for grief. Will you go? I don't know. But even as I said it, I recognized the lie. Some gravitational pull was already drawing me toward Dannemora, toward answers I both craved and feared. Would you? If you were me. Emma, I've imagined conversations with my son every day for 5 years. What I'd say. What he'd say. The questions I'd ask. Pause. But imagination is safe. Reality might break us all over again. After we hung up, I sat watching fireflies emerge in my small backyard, their brief flashes of light punctuating the darkness. 5 years ago, my future had seemed as clearly mapped as the streets of Millfield. Now I stood at another crossroads, unsure which path led to healing and which to fresh pain. By morning my decision was made. I requested a week's personal leave from Principal Davis, packed a small suitcase, and plotted the route to Dannemora on my GPS. A 6-hour drive north to the edge of the Adirondacks. Martha appeared as I was loading my car, holding a thermos of coffee and a tin of homemade cookies. Road provisions, she said simply. Then pressing something into my palm, and this. A small, smooth stone with the word courage etched into its surface. Whatever you discover, whatever he tells you, remember you've survived the worst already. The drive north gave me too much time to think, to rehearse the confrontation awaiting me. Would I be cold and distant? Would I scream the questions that had haunted me for years? Would I sit in silence, forcing him to fill the void he'd created? I practiced possible scenarios aloud as miles of highway unspooled before me. How could you do this to me? Was any of it real, or was I just convenient until something better came along? Did you laugh about it afterward? Did you both find it amusing? Poor naive Emma waiting at the altar. By the time I checked into a Spartan motel 20 minutes from the prison, my emotions had cycled through rage, grief, curiosity, and exhaustion. Tomorrow I would face the man who had shattered my world. Tomorrow I would finally get answers. What I couldn't know as I lay sleepless in that unfamiliar bed was that Eric's revelations would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my sister, my ex-fiancé, and the betrayal that had defined the last 5 years of my life. Clinton Correctional Facility loomed against the morning sky, its imposing stone walls and guard towers a stark contrast to the peaceful Adirondack landscape surrounding it. I sat in my car, gripping Martha's courage stone so tightly my knuckles whitened. The clock on my dashboard read 9:47 a.m. Visiting hours began at 10 o'clock. After a sleepless night rehearsing what I would say, the moment of confrontation had arrived. I applied lipstick with trembling hands, a small armor of normalcy against what awaited inside. The processing area smelled of disinfectant and processed air. I surrendered my belongings, passed through metal detectors, endured the suspicious scrutiny of corrections officers. My visitor's badge felt like a brand against my blouse. "First time?" asked an older woman in line ahead of me, her weathered face kind. I nodded, unable to explain my presence to a stranger. "It gets easier," she offered, though nothing about this felt like something I should get used to. The visiting room was neither as grim nor as chaotic as I'd imagined from TV shows. Tables bolted to the floor. Vending machines humming against one wall. Families clustered together. Mothers bouncing babies on their laps, children showing drawings to men in identical green uniforms, couples holding hands across tables under the watchful eyes of guards. I almost didn't recognize him. The Eric Patterson who had vanished from Millfield bore little resemblance to the hollow-cheeked man who approached my table. Prison had stripped away his golden boy confidence along with 20 pounds he couldn't afford to lose. His once athletic frame appeared almost fragile beneath the standard-issue uniform. Cancer had done the rest. His complexion held the sallow undertone of serious illness, and his eyes, those blue eyes that had once made my heart race, were sunken and rimmed with shadows. "Emma." My name emerged like a prayer from lips I once knew better than my own. "You came." I hadn't planned to stand, but my body moved automatically. For one disorienting moment I thought he might try to embrace me. Instead, he extended his hand formally, as if we were strangers meeting at a business function. I didn't take it. We sat across from each other, the cheap laminate table a canyon between our separate worlds. Up close, I could see the yellow tinge to his skin, jaundice, a sign the cancer had reached his liver. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice rougher than I remembered. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I." The words came out colder than intended. A sad smile flickered across his face. I deserve that. I deserve all your anger. What I deserve is an explanation, I countered. 5 years is a long time to wait. Eric's eyes dropped to his hands, thinner with bitten nails, a far cry from the manicured fingers that had once slid a diamond ring onto mine. I wouldn't have reached out if... He swallowed hard. If circumstances hadn't forced my hand. You mean dying? He flinched at my bluntness but nodded. 3 months, maybe less. Something about facing the end makes you take inventory of your mistakes. And I was what, your biggest regret? My voice cracked despite my determination to remain composed. One of many. He looked up, meeting my gaze. But not for the reasons you think. For the next hour, Eric unraveled a story so twisted I could barely process it. Their escape to New York, the perfect new life I'd imagined them building on the ruins of mine, had quickly soured. Veronica changed once we got to the city, he explained. It was like watching someone shed their skin. The woman I thought I loved disappeared, replaced by someone obsessed with status, money, connections. So you turned to fraud? I couldn't keep the disgust from my voice. Not at first. He shook his head. I got a legitimate job at Meridian Investments. Worked 16-hour days trying to build something that would justify. He gestured vaguely, unable to put into words the devastation they'd left behind. Justify destroying me? I supplied. Pain flashed across his face. Nothing could justify that. Veronica, meanwhile, had grown increasingly dissatisfied. The apartment wasn't luxurious enough. His salary, though substantial for a newcomer, couldn't support the lifestyle she craved. The glamorous social media posts my mother had described, designer clothes, exclusive restaurants, Hamptons weekends, were financed by maxed-out credit cards and mounting debt. She kept saying we deserved more. That we hadn't taken this risk just to live like everyone else. The first questionable investment opportunity came 6 months after they arrived in New York. A small manipulation of client funds, quickly replaced before anyone noticed. Then another. Each time the stakes higher, the schemes more elaborate. It was Veronica who suggested creating the investment fund, Eric admitted, his voice hollow. She had an incredible mind for it, identifying wealthy targets, crafting the perfect pitch. I was just the front man, the trusted face with the finance background. I felt physically ill. You're saying my sister masterminded a multi-million-dollar fraud? She did more than that. His eyes held a haunted look. She planned her exit strategy from the beginning. Not just from Millfield or from you, from me. 18 months ago, as federal investigators began closing in, Veronica had disappeared. One morning Eric woke to an empty bed, emptied accounts and altered documents throughout their home office that implicated him as the sole architect of the fraud. She took everything, the cash, the offshore accounts, even jewelry she could pawn. Left me with nothing but fabricated evidence perfectly organized for the FBI to find. I wanted to disbelieve him, to label this another manipulation. Yet something in his defeated posture, in the utter lack of self-preservation in his confession, rang true. Why would she do this? I whispered. Eric reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper, sliding it across the table. A guard stepped forward, but Eric raised his hands. Just a letter. She's allowed to see it. The paper was worn thin from repeated folding and unfolding. I recognized Veronica's handwriting immediately. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Did you really think this was about us? You were just a stepping stone. Thanks for taking the fall. Don't try to find me. You won't succeed. The breath left my lungs in a rush. 5 simple sentences that confirmed every insecurity I'd ever felt about my beautiful, ambitious, dangerous sister. I was a means to an end for her, Eric said quietly. And so were you. I stared at him across the table, truly seeing him for the first time, not as the villain of my story, but as another victim of Veronica's calculated games. We were both pawns, I said, the realization washing over me like ice water. Eric nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and something else, a question he seemed afraid to ask. A guard announced visiting hours were ending. Inmates began saying their goodbyes, hugging children and kissing partners. Eric and I sat motionless, connected by a shared betrayal neither of us had fully understood until this moment. I have so many questions, I finally managed. Come back tomorrow, he said, a plea in his voice. There's more you need to know. As I drove back to my motel, my sister's note burned in my pocket like a live coal. The woman who had shared my childhood bedroom, who had braided my hair for prom, who had stood beside me as I chose my wedding dress, had been plotting against us both all along. The question that haunted me wasn't why Eric had left me at the altar anymore. It was why Veronica had hated me enough to orchestrate our mutual destruction. I returned to Millfield with Eric's medical power of attorney in my purse and a mission burning in my mind. The remainder of the school year passed in a blur. Teaching, grading final projects, attending the 5th grade graduation. My colleagues noticed the change in me, the new intensity that had replaced 5 years of careful numbness. You seem different, Principal Davis remarked during our end-of-year meeting. More present. I smiled without explanation. How could I tell her that rage had awakened something in me? Not the impotent anger I'd nursed after being left at the altar, but a focused fury directed at the true architect of my pain. The day after school ended, I converted my dining room into an investigation headquarters. Maps, timelines, and notes covered the walls. I created a systematic approach, beginning with what Eric had shared during our subsequent prison visits. After she disappeared, I hired a private investigator, he told me, his voice weaker during our final meeting. Depleted my last savings before the arrest. He traced her to Charleston initially, but the trail went cold. That was my starting point. I contacted the investigator, a retired NYPD detective named Hargrove, who was initially reluctant to speak with me. Client confidentiality, he explained over the phone. The client is dying, I countered. And I'm his medical proxy now. He's authorized me to access everything. Hargrove's files proved invaluable: bank transactions, travel records, a single blurry photograph of a woman who resembled Veronica entering a South Carolina bank. Most crucially, he traced a wire transfer to a Miami account under the name Vivian Taylor. Miami, Martha said when I showed her my progress. We'd become unexpected partners in this quest, her organizational skills complementing my determination. It makes sense. International banking connections, quick escape routes to Caribbean countries with no extradition. I booked a flight to Miami for the first week of July, using most of my summer savings. The city's oppressive heat hit me like a wall as I exited the airport, but my focus never wavered. I'd rented a small efficiency apartment in South Beach as my base of operations, chosen for its proximity to the financial district where Vivian Taylor had opened her account. 3 days of careful surveillance outside the bank yielded nothing. On the 4th morning, I nearly missed her. The woman who emerged from a sleek silver Mercedes wore oversized sunglasses, her once dark hair now platinum blonde and cut in a sophisticated bob. But I recognized the distinctive way she tilted her head when checking her phone, a mannerism so familiar it sent a jolt through me. Veronica, my sister, living her glamorous new life while Eric wasted away in prison. I followed her to an upscale coffee shop, watching through the window as she chatted animatedly with a well-dressed older man. They reviewed documents together, laughing occasionally, the picture of successful business partners. I snapped photos with my phone, hands trembling with adrenaline. Back in my rental, I researched the man, Harold Wexler, prominent Miami real estate developer. His company website featured Vivian Taylor as Director of International Investments. My sister's reinvention was complete. My next lead came from an unexpected source. Eric had mentioned his former business partner, James Corrigan, who had narrowly avoided indictment when the fraud was discovered. James knew something was wrong, Eric had explained. He tried to warn me about Veronica, but I was too blind to see it. Corrigan proved difficult to locate. After the scandal, he'd retreated from finance, apparently working now as a sailing instructor in Connecticut. I drove 6 hours to find him, rehearsing my approach. The man adjusting rigging on a small sailboat looked nothing like the polished investment banker from news photos. Sun-weathered and casually dressed, Corrigan spotted me hovering on the dock and froze. "You look just like her," he said without preamble. "I'm nothing like her," I replied. Over beer at a dockside restaurant, Corrigan filled crucial gaps in my understanding. Veronica approached me first, before Eric. Came to an industry event, introduced herself, asked pointed questions about our client structure. When was this? I asked, my stomach sinking. About 8 months before your wedding. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. Veronica had been plotting this while helping me choose wedding invitations, while standing beside me at dress fittings. She wanted inside information about our firm, Corrigan continued. When I didn't bite, she targeted Eric. I warned him she seemed calculating, but he shrugged. He said I was jealous. Maybe I was. But I also saw something predatory in her that he couldn't. The pieces shifted in my mind, forming a clearer picture. But I needed more. I returned to Millfield, to my parents' house where Veronica and I had grown up. While they vacationed in Maine, I searched our childhood bedroom, now converted to a guest room. Nothing unusual until I examined the antique jewelry box my grandmother had left Veronica. Something she hadn't taken in her calculated escape. Hidden in a false bottom lay a small key with a numbered tag. A storage unit key. The facility was on the outskirts of town. One of those anonymous places where people store the remnants of failed marriages or deceased relatives' belongings. Unit 227 contained a single plastic bin. Inside, I found the evidence of my sister's long-term betrayal, journals documenting her resentments, photographs of me with tracked movements, detailed notes about Eric dating back to high school. Most disturbing were files about other relationships she'd sabotaged, an anonymous email that had driven away my college boyfriend, coincidental meetings with my first teaching colleague who'd expressed interest in me. Veronica had systematically eliminated potential happiness from my life long before she took Eric. I was still processing this discovery when the first threat arrived. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging or you'll regret it. 2 days later, my classroom at Pinewood was vandalized. Nothing was stolen, but my desk was rifled through, my files disturbed. The police called it random, but Martha and I knew better. She's watching you, Martha said, helping me clean up the mess. Which means you're getting close to something that threatens her. The final threat came as a brick through my living room window with a note attached. Last warning. That's when I made the call to the FBI's white-collar crime division, speaking to Special Agent Diaz, who had built the case against Eric. I know who really orchestrated the Patterson investment fraud, I said. And I have proof she's operating under a new identity in Miami. 2 weeks later, I sat in a Miami hotel room while federal agents attached a wire to my body. Agent Diaz reviewed the plan one final time. Meet Veronica at the upscale restaurant where I'd made reservations under my name, knowing her curiosity would override her caution. Wear the watch with the recording device. Get her to talk about the past. Be careful, Diaz warned. Your sister has proven she's ruthless when cornered. I nodded, examining my reflection. 5 years of pain had hardened me in ways Veronica wouldn't expect. The timid, trusting sister she'd betrayed no longer existed. Don't worry, I replied, adjusting my earrings, the ones Eric had given me for our last Christmas together. I know exactly who I'm dealing with now. As I walked into the restaurant, spotting Veronica already seated at a corner table, her new blonde hair gleaming under recessed lighting, I felt strangely calm. The woman who had systematically destroyed my life sat sipping champagne, unaware that her carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. Justice had taken 5 years, but it had finally found its way to my sister's door. Emma. My name sounded foreign in Veronica's mouth as I slid into the chair across from her. What an unexpected surprise. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which darted around the restaurant calculating escape routes. The platinum blonde hair and designer dress couldn't mask the sister I'd grown up with. The same calculating glint remained behind her carefully crafted facade. Hello, Vivian, I replied, emphasizing her false name. Or do you prefer Veronica when it's just family? A flicker of unease crossed her features before she recovered, raising her champagne flute in a mock toast. I wondered how long it would take you to find me. I'm impressed it only took 5 years. Would have been sooner if I'd known you were the mastermind all along. Her laugh was practiced, theatrical. Mastermind? Always so dramatic, Emma. I simply saw an opportunity for a better life and took it. By destroying mine? By setting up your boyfriend to take the fall for your crimes. Veronica's posture shifted subtly, her shoulders tightening. Eric made his own choices. I placed Veronica's letter to Eric on the table between us, watching her face as recognition dawned. Asterisk, you were just a stepping stone. Thanks for taking the fall. Asterisk, I quoted. Those were your words, weren't they? right before you disappeared with millions and left him to face prison alone. The first crack in her composure. A slight tremor in the hand reaching for her water glass. Where did you get that? From Eric. He's dying of pancreatic cancer in Dannemora prison while you're reinventing yourself as Vivian Taylor, Director of International Investments. I leaned forward. I also found your storage unit in Millfield. The journals. The evidence of how methodically you sabotaged every relationship I ever had. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. You always had everything handed to you. The pretty one. The sweet one. Everyone's favorite Turner daughter. Is that how you justified it? Destroying my life because you were jealous. I justified nothing, she snapped, the polished Miami socialite momentarily replaced by the bitter sister I'd never truly known. I took what I deserved. And Harold Wexler? Does he know his brilliant investment director is actually a fugitive who orchestrated a multi-million-dollar fraud? That the SEC and FBI are very interested in her current activities. The color drained from Veronica's face. She glanced toward the door then back at me. What do you want? Money? Is that why you're here? Justice, I replied simply, touching my watch to ensure the recording device was capturing everything. For Eric. For me. For everyone you've hurt. Her smug mask crumbled completely. You're wearing a wire. I didn't answer, but my expression must have confirmed her suspicion. She leaned in, voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You think you've won? Poor, pathetic Emma, still trying to prove she matters. She laughed bitterly. Do you know how easy it was to take Eric from you? One conversation. That's all it took for him to forget 5 years with you. One promise of excitement beyond your suffocating small-town life. I maintained eye contact, refusing to show how her words still had power to wound. Tell me about the investment fraud, Veronica. About the doctored documents you left for the FBI. She stood abruptly, gathering her purse. This conversation is over. It is, I agreed calmly. Because federal agents are at every exit. Your new life is over, Veronica. As if on cue, Agent Diaz approached our table, badge displayed. Veronica Turner? You're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. The look my sister gave me as they led her away wasn't rage or even hatred. It was something closer to respect. A final acknowledgement that she had underestimated me completely. 2 weeks later, I sat beside Eric's hospital bed in the prison infirmary. The cancer had accelerated, leaving him jaundiced and frail, his breathing labored. I held his hand, telling him everything. Veronica's arrest, the evidence recovered, the additional charges being filed. She never loved me, did she? He asked, his voice barely audible. I don't think she knows how to love, I answered honestly. He nodded, eyes closing briefly. I tried to back out, the morning of the wedding. Told her I couldn't go through with it, that I needed to tell you the truth. What happened? She threatened to tell everyone about a mistake I'd made at work. A client's account I'd briefly mishandled. Said she'd make sure I lost my license, my reputation. His grip tightened slightly on mine. I was a coward, Emma. Afraid of scandal, of failure. I'm so sorry. We were both manipulated, I said, surprised to find I meant it. In his final days, we found an unexpected peace. Not reconciliation exactly, but a shared understanding of how thoroughly we'd both been deceived. When he died 3 weeks later, I was there holding his hand as he slipped away. Martha and I attended his small funeral together, standing apart from the few others who came. Back in Millfield, we planted a maple tree in her backyard in his memory. Not for the man who had abandoned me, but for the fellow victim who had helped me find the truth. 8 months later, I stood in a federal courtroom for Veronica's sentencing. The evidence against her was overwhelming, not just for the original fraud but for her subsequent crimes under her false identity. She sat expressionless at the defense table, not once looking in my direction. When called to deliver my victim impact statement, I approached the podium with steady steps. The courtroom fell silent as I faced the judge, my prepared statement forgotten as I spoke from the heart. My sister stole more than money. She methodically destroyed my trust, my future, my capacity to believe in others. For 5 years I lived half a life defined by her betrayal. But standing here today I reclaim my story. Veronica's actions reflect on her character, not my worth. In seeking justice I found myself again. The 15-year sentence provided no satisfaction, only closure. What truly healed me was the letter delivered by Martha 3 weeks after Eric's death. His final communication, written in shaky handwriting during his last days. Emma, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. There's one last truth I never told you. The morning of our wedding, I called your cell phone repeatedly. I wanted to confess everything, to beg your forgiveness. Veronica had taken your phone while helping you dress. She intercepted every call, told me you were having doubts too. Another manipulation in her grand design. I know it changes nothing, but I loved you, Emma. Truly. In my weakness, I lost the one genuine thing in my life. Find happiness. You deserve it more than anyone I've known. Eric. 1 year after Veronica's sentencing, I stood in my empty Millfield home, boxes packed for my move to Boston. I'd accepted a position at Brighton Academy, a prestigious private school that had recruited me after learning about my role in uncovering the fraud case that had made national headlines. Martha arrived to say goodbye, bringing a small potted plant from my new apartment. Ready for your fresh start? She asked, embracing me. More than ready, I replied. As I drove away from Millfield, past the church where I'd once waited in vain for a groom who never came, I felt no bitterness. The small-town teacher defined by scandal and betrayal was gone. In her place was a woman who had faced her deepest pain and emerged stronger. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't in Veronica's imprisonment or in exposing her crimes. It was in reclaiming my future, one brave choice at a time. In refusing to let her actions dictate the rest of my story. Some ties, even blood ties, are meant to be broken. And sometimes from those broken pieces, we build something stronger than before.